Hey everyone, it is Bethany from Chicago Gardener here, and I have been gardening in containers now, I think for 5 years, on either this rooftop deck or a previous rooftop deck in the city. And today what I wanted to go over is what I have found to be the best tomato types for growing in either containers or smaller gardens, and some pros and cons of the different types depending on your situation and what you're looking for. So I love when there is one exact answer as far as what is the best tomato to grow in a container, and you're like, oh, it's the XYZ variety. But I think this is a situation where the answer is more, it depends. So first off, I wanted to go over the two different types of tomato plants in general. There are determinate tomato types and there are indeterminate tomato types, and they both have different growth habits. So determinate tomato types will grow to a predetermined height, and this is usually a little bit of a bushier shape, a little bit shorter of a plant, maybe like 4 to 5 feet max, and they set all of their fruit at once, and then that's it. They're not going to grow anymore, they're not going to set any more fruit. Whereas indeterminate tomato varieties will continue to grow throughout the season, and they'll also continue to produce fruit throughout the season, basically until the frost kills them. Now, I'm currently growing both an indeterminate and determinate tomato variety in my garden, so I do have experience growing both. But I would say the first thing you want to think about is how much room do you really have to dedicate to a tomato plant? And how are you going to use those tomatoes? So a lot of the canning varieties are determinate tomato types because in that case, they're all going to set fruit usually within the same 2 to 3 week period. So you can harvest them all at once and do your canning. So if that's important to you, go for a determinate variety. If you want a steady supply of tomatoes, usually for the most part, I'm picking them off of the plant and eating them before they even make it down to the kitchen. So that's why I like to have an indeterminate tomato type in my garden. I would say, based on what I grow right now, I really have room for 2, maybe 3 tomato plants in my garden. So I do have to be a little bit strict as far as what the criteria is for tomatoes in my garden. Now, because I know that I'm more likely eating off the plant, that's why I like to go towards indeterminate. But I really found that I've been loving determinate varieties this year, especially when I'm going ahead and making some pasta sauce that we can then eat later when the garden is no longer in season, just as a little reminder of the garden for that year. So yes, first of all, understanding how you're going to use the tomatoes, I think is going to lead you in the right direction. Now, I will say, I believe you can grow either types of these in a small garden, in a container garden, just fine. But there is one that's going to require a little bit more work, and that is the indeterminate tomato. I say this because with the determinate tomato this year, I did nothing. I didn't prune. I didn't do anything in terms of maintenance other than water and fertilize, and it stayed compact. It stayed width-wise was good, height-wise was great in the garden. I will take you over in just a little bit and show you the 2 tomato plants that I have, but it was very, very low maintenance. Whereas my indeterminate tomato plant, I definitely need to prune. I didn't prune as much as I needed to, and it started growing into my other plants, knocking over some flowers, breaking some branches. So it does require more maintenance to kind of control the size and the growth of an indeterminate tomato variety. So if you prefer to be a little bit more lazy with maintenance like I tend to be, then determinate might be the variety for you versus getting an indeterminate, which can very quickly take over your garden. However, on that though, because indeterminate varieties will continue to grow, they're very good for trellising or training to grow in a certain shape. So I have both mine in cages anyway, just because I don't want them flopping all over the place. But I have seen people who grow indeterminate tomato types even over arches, which is really cool. And that's just not something you can do with a determinate tomato variety because their shape is pretty much set. If you prune anything off of a determinate tomato, you're basically just going to lose the fruit that it was going to set, and it's not going to get big enough in order for you to train it. So if you have kind of a unique space where maybe you want to grow a tomato over an arch, or you want something that's very, very narrow but can go very tall, then I would definitely recommend an indeterminate tomato variety for those purposes. Container size can also vary a little bit between the 2 types. So again, depending upon how much space you have, typically what's recommended for a determinate variety is 5 to 7. I would probably lean more towards the 7 range for that because these plants, unless you're growing a dwarf variety, A regular determinate tomato plant will still get a pretty hefty size in the garden, again 4 to 5 feet. So for me, a 5-gallon would probably be a little bit too small. I'd probably aim for like 7 to maybe 10, whereas with Indeterminate, it is recommended like 10, 15 gallons. I happen to grow both of mine in 30-gallon grow bags because grow bags, one, I find they're great for vegetables. They're great for container gardens because of the drainage, and they're very, very inexpensive compared to other container types. So a 30-gallon grow bag was about $4 to $5 for 30 gallons worth of growing space. Now the soil was obviously much more than that, but in terms of cost effectiveness, you can get a pretty large container size if you're getting a grow bag for relatively cheap. However, maybe you don't have room for 30 gallons. Maybe you don't even really have room for 10 gallons. So you might want to stick to either a determinate tomato or some sort of dwarf variety that's going to stay smaller. Look specifically too for like patio, baby patio variety. Something with the word patio in it usually means that it was intended for container gardens and will stay a bit smaller in your garden. So what is my recommendation? Well, if you have enough room, I would recommend trying one of each, just so you can get an idea of how it does in your garden and how you use the tomatoes. If you only have space for one and your growing season is like relatively like maybe 3, 4, 5 months long, I would say go for Indeterminate, because again, if you only have one plant, it should be fairly easy to maintain. I say that as someone who only has 2 plants and still didn't maintain the one that they have. But if you're only focusing on one, you will be able to more easily, hypothetically, stay up on pruning, guide it into the shape that you want it to grow, and then you'll have that fruit that sets throughout the season so you can enjoy it the whole season long instead of having a plant in your garden that's only going to produce for a short time and then basically die back. That way you're making the maximum production in a smaller space in your garden, because the Indeterminate is going to continue to produce a lot more than a determinate plant will. So that would be my recommendation, is to just do one, go for Indeterminate, see how you like it. If it's too much to maintain, it goes too crazy, takes up too much space, then go on the hunt for a determinate variety. Now this is slightly off topic, but I will say if you're going for an Indeterminate, I tend to have the best luck with cherry tomato varieties, so where the fruit is smaller. I don't have the same issues as when I've grown larger fruit varieties with things like blossom end rot. I usually get a very good continuous crop of healthy fruit. So if it is your first time growing, you have space for one, I would go with Indeterminate and a cherry tomato variety. But again, it's going to be how you use it and what you prefer. But having said that, let me go over and I will show you the 2 in my garden so you can actually see kind of what they look like and see the one that's kind of going out of control. Let's start over here with my Determinate Roma tomato. So this back here, you can see there is fruit that is ready to harvest. I really just started harvesting off of this in the last couple weeks, whereas my Indeterminate, which is behind the zinnias, oh gosh, when did I even start harvesting off of that? Maybe it was early July, I'd say. So yeah, I really didn't get any fruit on here until like late August, early September, but it's produced a ton in that short time period. So I definitely have to go in there and harvest, but this is the height it got. So it's in a 30-gallon grow bag, which is maybe 1.5 feet off of the ground. So that already gives it some height. And then I put in there a cage that is maybe 3 feet tall. And you can see it's just a few inches over the top. So these will grow until they start to set fruit, and then they stop at that height. I've done no pruning on this, which is what I'm supposed to do, unlike the other one. So it stayed, what is that, maybe 18 inches to 2 feet wide. And maybe it's gotten to 3.5 feet tall, just kind of at the top of this wall, which is absolutely perfect for the size in my garden because it didn't disrupt anything in this raised bed, and it didn't disrupt anything in the bed of zinnias next to it. Now coming over here, over to my Indeterminate variety. So this is a sun dipper, which they are kind of oblong shaped. I think you can see that there. I need to also go ahead and harvest off of this one, but I did a great job pruning like June, early July, and then things just kind of fall off from there. But you can see I've definitely had to prune the sides quite a bit, but even here it's grown over into this gomphrena bed. It's definitely taller than the wall. I think it might be the tallest, it's taller than all the zinnias, the tallest thing kind of in these grow bags. I've had to trim in the front just to keep the walkway clear. It's in the same type of cage as my Determinate Roma tomato, so same height, but you can't even really see the cage anymore. It got so intertwined with the zinnia, so I had to cut some branches off of there. I just had to do a lot more maintenance on this plant, even though I still didn't do enough as I probably should have. But again, because these grow so crazy and wild, it's much easier to shape them if you want them to grow in a particular shape, especially if it's something where, again, you want to keep it maybe more narrow, but allow it to grow more vertically, then Indeterminate is going to be the way to go. Oh, there's a little cardinal over there. Oh, there she goes. So yeah, those are the two in my garden. I really liked having both of these in order to kind of have two different experiences. One with fruit that I can pick and eat right away, one with fruit that I will harvest all at once and usually make something with. So I think this combination of one of each is going to be what I do going forward. So after 5 years of growing tomatoes in containers, I do think I'm at a good place right now where I have one of each, one Indeterminate, one Determinate. I think if I was to add a third, I don't know which one I'd go for. Would I go for another Determinate to not take up much space, or would I go for another Indeterminate because I tend to eat the fruit more right off the plant than I do canning or making sauces? I don't know. That's a good question, but I don't know if I can take any more room away from my flowers for another tomato plant. So yeah, I am pretty happy with where I'm at right now. I think that'll be my plan going forward. If you have small space and you grow tomatoes, let me know what you do. Do you go for more smaller, shorter varieties, or do you like to be able to have something that maybe you can train to fit more easily into your small space? Also, let me know the container size that you grow them in. 30-gallon is definitely more than I need. I often add other plants in there. I had basil in there with my tomatoes. I think I had chives in there. I tried a ground cherry in there, but that got swallowed up by the tomato plant. So you don't need to have 30-gallon grow bags. That's just what I have, and it's worked really well. But you can definitely get away with something that's like 10 to 15 gallon, and that should be just fine in your garden. So that's going to be everything for today. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.